Dr. Jake Miller had been staring at the same purple tent for 6 days straight, and he was losing his mind. The tent belonged to the Vorath delegation, a group of crystalline aliens who looked like walking chandeliers and treated everything with the kind of seriousness usually reserved for funerals. They'd been humming in meditation since the moment the expedition landed on Kethra 9, preparing themselves to enter the ancient temple that sat just 200 meters away. Jake took another sip of his terrible instant coffee and checked his watch. 6 days, 14 hours, and 23 minutes of waiting. He was a xenoarchaeologist, not a monk. He'd signed up to study alien ruins, not to watch other aliens sit around humming at them. The temple itself was magnificent, he had to admit. It rose from the rust-colored desert like a massive black crystal, its surface so smooth it looked wet even though it hadn't rained on this planet in about 3 million years. The architects who built it had vanished long before humans even existed, leaving behind structures scattered across the galaxy that nobody really understood. Every species treated these ruins like holy sites. Every species except humans, apparently. Jake's colleague, a phase-shifting quelm named something his translator rendered as whisper of distant thunder, drifted past his tent. The quelm looked like smoke given shape, constantly shifting between being solid and not quite there. "You should join us in preparation, Dr. Miller," it said in its echoey voice. "The temple demands respect." "Yeah, I'll get right on that," Jake muttered after it had floated away. Respect was fine, but this was getting ridiculous. He'd traveled 8 months through space to get here. He had equipment to set up, scans to run, samples to collect. He had a job to do, and that job wasn't sitting cross-legged in the dirt while aliens hummed. The other expedition members were scattered around the camp in various states of meditation or prayer. The Sindri, who were telepathic and vaguely insect-like, had formed a circle and hadn't moved in 2 days. The Vorath continued their harmonic humming. Even Captain Hayes, the only other human on the expedition, seemed content to wait it out, reading a book in her tent and occasionally reminding Jake to show some cultural sensitivity. Cultural sensitivity. Right. Jake had spent 5 years getting his doctorate, another 3 studying architect sites, and he was supposed to show sensitivity by doing absolutely nothing while aliens communed with vibes or whatever they thought they were doing. That night, after everyone had finally settled into sleep or whatever passed for sleep among the various species, Jake made a decision. He grabbed his scanner, tucked a flashlight into his belt, and headed for the temple. The twin moons of Kethra 9 provided plenty of light, and the walk across the desert was quiet except for the crunch of his boots on the sandy ground. Up close, the temple was even more impressive. The entrance was a perfect oval, 20 meters high, and it led into darkness so complete his flashlight seemed to get swallowed by it. Jake stepped inside, and his boots echoed on stone that felt solid but somehow wrong, like it wasn't quite in sync with normal reality. The interior was covered in geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly. Not painful, exactly, but uncomfortable, like trying to see something in your peripheral vision that vanished when you looked straight at it. The patterns covered every surface in precise mathematical arrangements that Jake's scanner couldn't quite map properly. The readings kept glitching, showing impossible angles and dimensions that shouldn't exist in normal space. Jake spent an hour taking measurements, collecting data, and generally doing the actual archaeology work he'd come here for. The whole time, a part of his brain kept insisting something was wrong, that he should leave, that this place wasn't meant for him. He ignored it. That instinct was probably what made the aliens spend a week meditating outside. Humans didn't have time for that kind of superstitious nonsense. He was getting frustrated with his scanner when he noticed a particularly clear section of wall. Unlike the rest of the surface, which was covered in those headache-inducing patterns, this spot was blank. Perfectly, pristinely blank. It practically begged for something to be written on it. Jake pulled out his marker, the same one he used to label sample containers. Without really thinking about it, annoyed by the whole situation and tired of taking everything so seriously, he drew a simple smiley face on the wall. 2 dots for eyes, a curved line for a smile. Childish, sure, but it made him feel better. A small human mark on an ancient alien wall that everyone treated like it was made of glass. He stepped back to admire his handiwork, chuckling to himself. The other expedition members would probably lose their minds if they saw it, but Jake figured he could always wipe it off before anyone noticed. That's when the face blinked. Jake froze. The 2 dots he'd drawn shifted, moving like actual eyes. The curved smile widened, stretching beyond where he'd drawn it, spreading across the wall like a crack in ice. Then the wall behind the face started to ripple, reality itself seeming to tear open like wet paper. "Oh no," Jake whispered. "Oh no, no, no." The smile kept growing, and through the widening rift, something vast and incomprehensible began to wake up. The rift expanded across the wall like spilled ink, not breaking the black stone but existing through it somehow, as if the wall was just a curtain and something behind it had decided to peek through. Jake stumbled backward, his scanner clattering to the floor, forgotten. Every instinct in his body screamed at him to run, but his legs felt like they'd been filled with concrete. Something emerged from the tear. Not physically, not in any way Jake's eyes could properly process, but it was there. Present. Aware. And it was looking directly at him. Jake's neural translator, the implant that let him communicate with alien species, went absolutely haywire. It buzzed and clicked in his head, trying desperately to process what this thing was saying. Numbers flooded his vision. Mathematical equations. Geometric concepts that his brain wasn't designed to understand. His translator cycled through a dozen languages, both human and alien, before finally settling on something that resembled actual words. Small thing, the voice said, though it wasn't really a voice. It was more like the concept of speaking being forced directly into Jake's brain. Small thing that should not be. Jake's mouth was dry. His hands were shaking. But somehow, he managed to croak out, "What are you?" The entity seemed to consider this. The rift pulsed with colors that didn't exist in normal space. "I am fragment. Piece of whole. Left behind when the architects departed." The architects. Jake's archaeological training kicked in despite his terror. "You're one of the beings who built this place." "Built?" "Yes. Also imprisoned." The entity's presence grew stronger, more defined. Jake could almost see a shape now, something that shifted between being enormous and impossibly small, existing in dimensions his eyes couldn't quite follow. "This temple is not monument. Is cage. Patterns on walls are not art. Are locks." Jake's blood ran cold. He looked at the geometric patterns covering every surface, the ones that hurt to look at directly. Containment seals. The whole temple was a prison, and he'd just drawn on one of the walls like an idiot tagging a bathroom stall. "Oh God," he whispered. "I didn't know. I'm sorry, I didn't." Apology is irrelevant. But the entity didn't sound angry. It sounded curious. Other species feel the warnings. In their bones. In their thoughts. They know to stay away. To respect. To fear. The presence leaned closer, and Jake felt like he was being examined under a microscope. "But you felt nothing. You drew." Jake swallowed hard. "Yeah, that's kind of a human thing. We're not great at sensing danger." "Human." The word seemed to confuse the entity. The rift flickered. "Human. Human. This word is not an architect predictions." Predictions? The architects mapped galaxies' future. Calculated evolution across billions of years. Predicted Vorith. Predicted Quelm. Predicted Sindri. Predicted species not yet born. The entity's attention focused on Jake with an intensity that made his skin crawl. "Did not predict humans. You are statistical impossibility. Cosmic error. Joke that became real." Despite everything, despite the terror and the knowledge that he'd probably just doomed himself and possibly the entire expedition, Jake felt a weird sort of pride at that. Humanity, the cosmic accident that nobody saw coming. That sounded about right. The entity circled him now, or at least that's what it felt like. Jake couldn't actually see it moving, but he felt its presence shifting around him, studying him from every angle. "I have been here long time. Very long time. Feeding on small violations. When someone accidentally disturbs pattern. When seal weakens. Small meals across eons." The rift pulsed brighter. "But you drew on wall. Deliberate irreverence. First real meal in million years." "So you're going to eat me," Jake said, trying to keep his voice steady. "That's the plan here." "Perhaps." The entity sounded almost playful now, which was somehow more terrifying than if it had been threatening. "But first. Curious. Want to understand. How does impossible species function? What makes humans real when they should be nothing?" Jake's brain was racing. The entity was curious. That meant it wasn't immediately hostile, at least not yet. It wanted to understand humans. That was something Jake could work with. He'd talked his way out of bad situations before, though admittedly none of those situations had involved ancient cosmic horrors. "Okay," Jake said, forcing himself to stand straighter. "You want to understand humans. I can do that. I can explain us to you. And why would I allow this?" The entity's presence grew heavier, more oppressive. Why not simply consume you and learn through absorption? Because, Jake said, thinking fast, if you eat me, you only get one human's worth of information. But if you let me live, I can tell you about all of humanity. Our whole history. Our culture. Everything that makes us the impossible species that broke your architect's predictions. The entity was silent for a long moment. The rift continued to pulse, colors bleeding through that Jake didn't have names for. Then, finally, interesting proposal. But insufficient. What do you want then? Jake asked. Bargain. I teach you how to reseal rift. Prevent my escape. In exchange, you answer 3 questions. Questions that prove human worth. Fail, and I consume not just you, but all humans in system. Jake felt like he'd been punched in the gut. 3 questions. That didn't sound so bad, except this thing apparently existed in multiple dimensions and thought in pure mathematics. What kind of questions would something like that even ask? But what choice did he have? He'd opened this door. He had to figure out how to close it. Deal? Jake said. 3 questions. I answer them, you teach me how to fix this mess. The entity's presence seemed to brighten, almost pleased. Good. 3 days. Prepare yourself, impossible human. If you fail, your species joins architect predictions. Which is to say, you become nothing. The rift stabilized, no longer expanding but not closing either. The smiley face Jake had drawn remained visible, now permanently etched into reality itself, a monument to human stupidity. Jake grabbed his scanner and ran back to camp, his mind already racing through everything he knew about human philosophy, culture, and history. Somewhere behind him, he could feel the entity watching, waiting, curious about the species that shouldn't exist. He had 3 days to prove humanity was worth keeping around. 3 days to pass a test designed by something that thought the entire human race was a mistake. No pressure. Jake burst into the camp just as the first sun was rising, sweating and out of breath. He'd run the entire way back from the temple, his mind spinning with what had just happened. He needed to tell someone. He needed help. He needed to figure out what the hell he was going to do. Captain Hayes was already awake, brewing coffee outside her tent. She took one look at Jake's face and dropped her mug. What did you do? I may have accidentally woken up something that was supposed to stay asleep, Jake said, trying to catch his breath. Something bad. Really bad. Within minutes, the entire camp was in chaos. The Vorith started humming in distress, a sound like crystal glasses vibrating at the wrong frequency. The Quelm phased in and out of visibility so rapidly they looked like static. The Sindri huddled together, their telepathic communication creating a buzz in the air that made Jake's teeth ache. The Vorith Elder, whose name Jake's translator rendered as Brightness of Dawn, turned her crystalline body toward him. Even without a face, Jake could feel her staring at him with what could only be described as absolute horror. You entered the temple. Alone. Without purification. Yeah, about that, Jake started. You touched the walls. Technically, I drew on them. If the Vorith could have had a heart attack, Jake was pretty sure Brightness of Dawn would have had one right then. She made a sound like breaking glass. You drew. On a containment seal. On an architect prison wall. In my defense, I didn't know it was a prison. The patterns, Brightness of Dawn's voice rose to a pitch that hurt Jake's ears. The warnings. Every species feels them. They speak to the soul. They say danger. They say death. They say stay away. Yeah, I just thought they were weird art, Jake admitted. Captain Hayes put her head in her hands. Miller, please tell me you didn't wake up a devourer. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the wind seemed to stop. You know what a devourer is? Jake asked. Hayes looked up at him with an expression that was equal parts fury and despair. I did the required reading before this mission, which apparently makes me the only human who did. Devourers are what the architects created before they disappeared. Entities designed to consume and process information. Except they couldn't be controlled. They ate entire star systems before the architects managed to trap them. Jake felt his stomach drop. How many star systems? Dozens. Maybe hundreds. The records aren't clear because most species that encountered them didn't survive to write anything down. The Sindri's telepathic voice entered everyone's mind simultaneously, a sensation like cold water being poured directly into their thoughts. Emergency beacon has been sent. Military fleet will arrive in 21 days. Recommend immediate evacuation. We can't wait 21 days, Jake said. I made a deal with it. I have 3 days to answer 3 questions. If I pass, it teaches me how to reseal the containment. If I fail, it consumes every human in the system. The camp erupted in arguments in about 7 different languages. The Vorith wanted to leave immediately. The Quelm suggested destroying the entire planet from orbit. The Sindri were calculating the odds of Jake's success, and from the looks on their insect-like faces, the numbers weren't good. Captain Hayes pulled Jake aside. 3 questions. What kind of questions? I don't know yet. It said it wants to understand why humans exist when we're not supposed to. We broke some kind of prediction the architects made about how evolution would work in the galaxy. We're a statistical anomaly? More like a cosmic accident that nobody saw coming. Hayes laughed, but it was the kind of laugh people make when the alternative is screaming. That actually tracks. Humans have always been good at showing up where we don't belong. She looked toward the temple, where energy readings were now visible even without equipment, purple and green lights dancing across the black surface. What are you going to tell it? The truth, I guess. Whatever that means to something that thinks in math and exists in multiple dimensions. Over the next 3 days, Jake barely slept. He spent every waking hour preparing, reading through every piece of human history, philosophy, and culture he could access from the expedition's database. He studied humanity's greatest achievements and worst failures. He read poetry and military history, scientific papers, and social media posts. He talked to Hayes about what made humans different from other species. He even, in a moment of desperation, rewatched some old Earth movies, thinking maybe humanity's stories about itself would provide some insight. The other expedition members gave him space, though they watched him with a mixture of pity and fascination. To them, Jake was already dead. He was just too stubborn to lie down yet. On the 3rd morning, as Jake was reviewing notes and drinking his 5th cup of coffee, the temple began to glow. The patterns on its surface pulsed with light, and Jake felt a pull in his chest, like someone had attached a string to his heart and was tugging gently but insistently. It was time. Captain Hayes walked him to the edge of camp. For what it's worth, she said, I'm glad it was you who screwed this up and not me. Thanks. That's very comforting. I mean it. If anyone can talk their way out of this, it's the guy who once convinced a Vorith customs official that beef jerky was a religious artifact. Jake smiled despite everything. That was one of my better moments. Go show this thing why humans are worth keeping around. And Jake. She gripped his shoulder. Don't try to be profound. Just be honest. That's what we're good at. Jake nodded and walked toward the temple. Behind him, he could hear the camp preparing for evacuation, just in case. The smart move would be to run. To let the military handle this. But Jake had started this mess, and he was going to finish it. The temple entrance yawned before him like a hungry mouth. The geometric patterns seemed to writhe on the walls, more active than before. Jake stepped inside, his footsteps echoing in the vast space. The rift was waiting for him, pulsing with that same impossible light. And within it, the entity stirred, its attention focusing on Jake like a spotlight made of pure awareness. Ready, impossible human, the voice boomed in his head. Jake took a deep breath. As I'll ever be. Hit me with your best shot. The entity's presence seemed to smile, and Jake realized with a chill that it was mimicking the smiley face he'd drawn 3 days ago. Question 1. The entity's presence filled the temple, pressing against Jake from all directions. He felt like he was standing at the bottom of an ocean, the weight of something vast and incomprehensible bearing down on him. The rift pulsed with colors that shouldn't exist, and Jake's translator worked overtime trying to convert whatever the entity was about to say into something his human brain could process. Question 1. The voice thundered in his skull. I have asked this to 17 species over 3 million years. None have answered in a way that satisfied me. That's reassuring, Jake muttered. Why do you persist when entropy promises oblivion? Your sun will die. Your species will end. Universe itself will grow cold and dark. All effort is meaningless. All struggle is futile. Why do you continue? Jake had expected something weird, but this was almost disappointing. It was the kind of question philosophy students argued about in college dorm rooms at 2 in the morning. Every species probably gave some noble answer about survival instinct or cosmic purpose or the meaning they created along the way. But Jake had promised himself he'd be honest. Because we're spite, he said simply. The entity went quiet. The rift's pulsing slowed. Explain. Humans know everything ends. We know the universe doesn't care about us. We know we're tiny and temporary and that nothing we do matters in the grand scheme of things. Jake walked closer to the rift, gaining confidence. And you know what our response to that is? We do stuff anyway, specifically to flip off the universe. Flip off. Make a rude gesture at. Show disrespect to. Jake grinned. Humans run marathons just to prove we can torture ourselves for 26 miles. We climb mountains because they are there. We built a car and shot it into space playing music, just because we thought it would be funny. We have people who jump out of perfectly good airplanes for fun. The entity's presence shifted, moving around Jake like it was examining him from new angles. This is survival instinct. All species have this. No, you're not getting it. We don't do these things to survive. We do them because they are pointless. We have people who've spent years building tiny ships inside bottles. We have people who memorize thousands of digits of pi. We have people who've walked to the North Pole just to plant a flag there and walk back. Jake pulled up his datapad, scrolling through files he'd prepared. We built underground vaults to store seeds in case of apocalypse. We sent golden records into space with music and greetings in dozens of languages for aliens we might never meet. We left footprints on our moon and plaques that say we came in peace for all mankind, knowing full well that those footprints will outlast our entire civilization. But why? The entity sounded genuinely confused now. If you know it is meaningless. Because it drives the universe crazy, Jake said. Because entropy says everything falls apart, and we say not today. Because the heat death of the universe is going to happen whether we like it or not, so we might as well paint some pretty pictures and write some good songs and build some cool stuff before the lights go out. He thought about his own choices, about spending years studying dead civilizations that nobody would remember in another million years. I'm an archaeologist. I study species that went extinct before humans even existed. Their suns have exploded. Their planets are dust. Everything they built is gone or will be gone soon. And I spend my life trying to understand them anyway, trying to remember them, trying to make sure someone knew they were here. Jake looked directly at where he thought the entity might be. That's the human answer to entropy. We know we're going to lose. We know the universe wins in the end. We just refuse to go quietly. We're going to make noise and leave marks and create things and remember things and be as annoying as possible right up until the last star burns out. And maybe, just maybe, that stubbornness is worth more than accepting oblivion gracefully. The temple was silent for a long moment. The geometric patterns on the walls seemed to pulse in rhythm with Jake's heartbeat. Then the entity spoke again, and if something beyond comprehension could sound impressed, it did. 17 species. 17 answers about duty, instinct, divine purpose, biological imperative. None spoke of spite. None spoke of defiance for its own sake. The rift brightened. Interesting. Question 2. Jake let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. 1 down. 2 to go. What gives you right to touch what you do not understand? This one was trickier. Jake knew what the entity wanted to hear. Other species probably talked about their wisdom, their careful study, their right as intelligent beings to explore and learn. They probably promised to be respectful and cautious. Jake decided honesty was still the best policy. We don't have the right, he admitted. We just do it anyway. Elaborate. Humans have a really bad habit of messing with things we don't understand and then figuring out the consequences later. Jake started pacing, his footsteps echoing in the vast space. We split the atom before we really understood what would happen. We invented nuclear weapons and then had to figure out how not to destroy ourselves with them. We started modifying our own genetics, building artificial intelligence, changing our planet's climate, sometimes on purpose, sometimes by accident. This sounds like foolishness. It absolutely is, Jake agreed. But here's the thing, we know it's foolish. We do it anyway. We have a saying, shoot first, ask questions later. Another one, it's easier to ask forgiveness than permission. We sent people to the moon before we fully understood the risks. We dove to the deepest parts of our oceans. We built the internet without knowing how it would change our entire civilization. He pulled up more examples on his pad. We took plants and animals from their native environments and moved them around the planet. Sometimes it worked out great. Sometimes it caused ecological disasters. We invented social media and then had to figure out what it was doing to our brains. We created plastic and only later realized we'd filled our oceans with it. You make mistakes. Cause harm. Destroy things. Yeah, we do. All the time. Constantly. Jake nodded. But we also learn. We adapt. We fix things, or we try to. We don't wait until we have perfect knowledge because if we did, we'd never do anything. Every human achievement came from someone who didn't fully understand what they were doing but decided to try anyway. Jake thought about himself, about drawing on that wall 3 days ago. I didn't have the right to touch your prison. I didn't understand what I was doing. But I did it, and now here we are, having this conversation. And maybe that's the point. Maybe humans aren't supposed to understand everything before we act. Maybe our whole deal is that we're the species that jumps in without looking and then figures out how to swim on the way down. The entity was quiet again, processing. Jake wiped sweat from his forehead. The temple felt hotter now, or maybe that was just his nerves. Other species claimed wisdom. Claimed divine mandate. Claimed evolutionary superiority. The entity's voice held something that might have been amusement. Only humans admit they have no right but do it anyway. Only humans call themselves fools and continue being fools. Yeah, well, someone has to, Jake said. Question 3. This was it. The final question. Jake's hands were shaking, but he stood his ground. Why should I not consume you and your entire species? Jake stared into the rift, into the swirling impossible colors and the vast presence that waited for his answer. This was the question that mattered. The one that would decide whether humanity survived or became just another footnote in the entity's 3 million-year existence. He thought about all the things he could say. He could beg for mercy. He could appeal to some sense of cosmic justice. He could offer humanity as servants or allies. He could promise they'd never bother the entity again. But none of that felt right. None of that felt human. You shouldn't consume us, Jake said slowly, because if you do, you'll be bored out of your mind for the rest of eternity. The entity's presence shifted. Explain. You've been trapped here for 3 million years, right? Feeding on tiny violations, little accidents, getting just enough to stay alive but never enough to actually do anything interesting. You said it yourself, 17 species have answered your questions over all that time. 17 conversations in 3 million years. Jake walked closer to the rift, his confidence building. And then I show up. Some idiot human who doesn't feel your warnings, doesn't respect your prison, just walks in and draws a smiley face on your wall. In 3 days, I've given you more entertainment than you've had in millennia. Entertainment is not reason for survival. It is when you're immortal, Jake shot back. What else do you have? You're stuck here. You're going to be stuck here for who knows how much longer. You can either consume the one species in the galaxy interesting enough to accidentally wake you up, or you can keep us around and see what insane thing we do next. He pulled up his datapad again, scrolling through files. Let me tell you what humans have done just in the last 100 years. We invented flying machines, went from the first airplane to landing on our moon in 66 years. We built a worldwide communication network that let every human on the planet talk to each other instantly, and we mostly used it to share pictures of cats and argue about nonsense. The entity was listening. Jake could feel its attention focused entirely on him. We created artificial intelligence and immediately started using it to generate fake images and write poetry. We discovered we were changing our planet's climate and half of us decided it wasn't real while the other half tried to fix it by drinking from paper straws. We made a movie about a ship that sank and everyone knew it would sink but we all cried anyway when it happened. Jake was on a roll now. We have people who voluntarily eat peppers so hot they cause physical pain, just to prove they can. We have entire sports based on throwing balls into hoops or hitting balls with sticks. We create art that makes no sense, music that's just noise, and food that's technically edible but shouldn't be. This is chaos. Exactly. Jake grinned. Beautiful, unpredictable, entertaining chaos. You said the architects predicted every species except us. You know why? Because we're the random variable. We're the ones who look at probability and say watch this before doing the statistically impossible. He thought about his own moment of drawing on the wall. Every other species felt your warnings and stayed away. That's predictable. That's boring. But humans? We're going to keep touching things we shouldn't touch, going places we shouldn't go, and doing things everyone says are impossible. And you, trapped in here with nothing but time, you're going to want to see what happens next. The entity's presence grew heavier, more focused. You offer me observation, entertainment, as reason to preserve your species. I'm offering you the only interesting thing that's going to happen to you in here, Jake said. You can consume us, absorb our knowledge, and go back to waiting another 1,000,000 years for something noteworthy to happen. Or you can keep us alive, and I guarantee you'll never be bored again. Jake pulled up footage from Earth. Look, I'll prove it. This is from just this year. Humans built a tower made entirely of cheese. Why? Because someone said, I bet we could build a tower out of cheese, and everyone else said, you're right, let's do it. It fell over immediately. It was completely pointless. And thousands of people came to watch. Incomprehensible. Right? Now imagine having front row seats to that kind of nonsense for the foreseeable future. Every day, somewhere in the galaxy, a human is doing something that makes no logical sense. And you get to watch. The temple went completely silent. The rift stopped pulsing. Jake's heart hammered in his chest as he waited for the entity's response. Had he gone too far? Was this too ridiculous? Had he just doomed humanity by essentially pitching them as a reality TV show for a cosmic horror? Then the entity laughed. It was a sound like stars collapsing, like reality hiccuping, like the universe getting a joke 3 million years after hearing it. 17 species offered sacrifice. Offered service. Offered reverence. Only humans offer themselves as entertainment and call it reason to live. Is that a yes? Jake asked hopefully. It is deal. I returned to containment. But with modification. Window. Connection. Access to observe humanity's continued chaos. Jake felt like his legs might give out from relief. You want streaming access to humanity? Crude but accurate description. I teach you Rezeal Rift. You provide regular updates on human activities. I remain contained but connected. Watching. Learning. Being entertained by impossible species that breaks all predictions. Deal? Jake said immediately. Absolutely deal. The entity began teaching him, pouring information directly into his brain in a way that made his translator smoke and his head throb. Equations, frequencies, patterns that needed to be restored. It took hours, and by the end Jake was exhausted, his nose bleeding from the mental strain, but he understood. He knew how to seal the containment. When Jake finally stumbled out of the temple at dawn, the entire expedition was packed and ready to evacuate. They stared at him like he was a ghost. Captain Hayes ran forward. Miller? You're alive? I made a deal, Jake said, his voice hoarse. It's going back into containment. The Vorath Elder's crystalline body shimmered with disbelief. Impossible. Devourers do not negotiate. They consume. Well, this one was bored, Jake said. And I promised to keep it entertained. Over the next few hours, Jake explained the deal while working to reseal the rift. The expedition members watched in horror and fascination as he rearranged the geometric patterns, following the entity's instructions. The rift slowly closed, shrinking back down until only a small, stable aperture remained, a window, as promised, displaying Jake's original smiley face. The face blinked at them. Captain Hayes stared at it. You turned an ancient cosmic horror into a pen pal. More like a subscriber, Jake corrected. I promised to upload regular updates about human civilization. News, entertainment, whatever humans are up to. The military fleet arrived 2 weeks later, ready to sterilize the planet. Instead, they found a contained devourer, a functioning temple, and Jake uploading the complete series of a cooking competition show where humans were judged on making elaborate cakes. The Galactic Council held emergency sessions. Some wanted Jake prosecuted. Others wanted him studied. A few wanted him given a medal. Eventually, they settled on banning humans from unsupervised contact with architect sites while also quietly noting that humanity had solved a problem nobody else could. Jake faced investigations, interviews, and countless meetings. His defense never changed. It worked, didn't it? 6 months later, Jake visited the temple one last time before leaving Kethra 9. The smiley face blinked at him from the wall. Through their connection, he felt the entity's presence, still curious, still watching. How are you enjoying Earth's internet? Jake asked. The response came as pure feeling, fascinating. Confusing. Humans argue about everything. Love it. More. Jake grinned and uploaded an entire archive of human history, reality television, social media highlights, and a compilation of videos where humans did increasingly ridiculous things for the entertainment of other humans. The entity consumed it all happily. Humanity had saved itself not through wisdom or strength, but by being exactly what they'd always been, entertainingly unpredictable chaos that even cosmic horrors couldn't resist watching. And somewhere in the temple on Kethra 9, an ancient being watched humanity stream and learned what the architects never predicted, that the universe's biggest joke might also be its most interesting story.